Hello again. This is part 2 of looking at sub-warfare and the Nazi Enigma and these topics. So go back to the PowerPoint. All right, so what we're looking at here is the Nazi Enigma. This was a machine that they used for all their codes, and it was a very awesome cipher machine. The problem for the Nazis, well, they thought it was foolproof. They thought there was no way people could intercept this code. So the man on the right, Marian Rejewski, I don't know how to pronounce his name. He was Polish. He was a Polish mathematician, brilliant. And already in the 1930s, the Polish were working on how to break this code. And they developed a way to do that unknown to the Germans. Now, when the Germans invade Poland, September 1, 1939, then Marian and other Polish fellows that were working with him, they escaped to Britain with all their research on this Enigma machine. And so then the British picked up the work to decipher German messages. Meanwhile, the Germans go into Poland and they conquer half of Poland, right? Remember, and they end up executing 200,000 Poles. And no doubt Marian would have been one of them if he had stayed. All right, so the British espionage, counter-espionage, however you want to say that. So down here is this place called Bletchley Park, and that's where they had their office, where these people worked at tirelessly at spying on the Germans and figuring out their messages. This man, Alan Turing, was a brilliant British cryptologist, mathematician, early computer theorist, I don't know the right word to call him, who really took off with this Nazi Enigma research. They end up developing this machine down here, which was called a bomb, or I don't know how to pronounce it, B-O-M-B-E, Bombe, I don't know, which allowed them to decode the German messages. That was until about 1942 when the Germans updated the Enigma and they made it more sophisticated. And so there was quite a bit of time there when the British didn't really know what was going on. We lost the ability to read their messages, and we had to figure it out. And so we knew that German U-boats carried this Enigma machine in code books, and so the British had a secret mission to capture this material from a U-boat. So I'm going to show you a little video that tells you how that went down. All right, October 30, 1942. Here we go.
Dawn, 30th of October, 1942. A periscope and the outline of a submarine are spotted by a Royal Air Force patrol aircraft in the eastern Mediterranean. This sighting will be a vital turning point.
Sorry, it's not buffering well.
Bletchley Park.
technology today.
Devastating months, the code.
This is annoying.
Dawn, 30th of October, 1942. A periscope and the outline of a submarine are spotted by a Royal Air Force patrol aircraft in the eastern Mediterranean. This sighting will be a vital turning point at Bletchley Park. For 10 devastating months, the code breakers have been working under a complete blackout of U-boat communications. The German Navy have introduced a new layer of encryption to their Enigma machine, a fourth rotor. HMS Petard and 3 other warships are on the scene by 10 a.m. and spend the next 10 hours hunting and depth charging the U-boat.
Come on.
Night has fallen when the submarine is finally forced to surface after sustaining serious damage.
I'm sorry. I don't know why.
Chaotic scenes unfold as the enemy crew start to abandon ship. Knowing the U-boat lies by the Allies, Teddy Fasson, the first lieutenant on Petard, and able seaman Colin Grazier immediately leap into the sea and swim through a mass of fleeing U-boat men towards the U-559. They are followed by Navy canteen assistant Tommy Brown. Cold and wet, Fasson and Grazier board the submarine. The blackness below. Time is running out for the men who are frantically collecting the priceless books and documents on the U-boat. Once the U-boat is gradually filling with water,
I'm sorry.
the 2 men hand various Enigma treasures to Brown, who, after exploring the engine and control room, has positioned himself on the U-boat's conning tower. Abandon ship, Brown screams, and plunges into the dark waters to be rescued by the boat crew. At that moment, the ill-fated U-boat suddenly takes in an enormous amount of water and rapidly sinks, taking Tony Fasson and Colin Grazier with it. The bodies of Fasson and Grazier were never recovered. Almost certainly they drowned, trapped in the sinking submarine. It's never more closely linked to individual sacrifice, but the 2 men did not die in vain. Just 3 weeks later, the documents taken from the U-559, including the U-boat's short signal and weather signal codebooks, arrived at Bletchley Park. This pinch provided Bletchley Park codebreakers with a priceless tool to help break the 4-rotor Enigma. Within an hour of breaking shark, the U-boat code, 15 U-boat positions were identified, and Bletchley Park was able to read naval traffic and crack Enigma codes for the remainder of the war. This enabled the Admiralty to reroute the vital convoys to and from the USA, saving thousands of tons of shipping and countless lives.
All right, well, I apologize for how the video played, but hopefully you could see the importance of what these three men did, getting the code books from the U-boat U-559, getting them back to Bletchley Park in Britain, where they could be used to break the code. So we'll go back to the PowerPoint here. So eventually, Alan Turing would develop this early computer called the Colossus. And so that's why I said he was a computer theorist, because he had this idea that you could build a machine that could do all kinds of tasks. And in this case, it was decode messages based off of their understanding of the Enigma. So in 1943, they were decoding 3,000 messages a day using this Colossus computer. So this is like behind the scenes stuff, right? So we look at D-Day in the last lesson, and you see all the, hundreds of thousands of Allied troops storming the beaches and doing the on the ground work. And then here behind the scenes, we have Alan Turing and his crew at Bletchley Park, and the Polish Marian Rejewski doing this work behind the scenes. That without knowing where all these U-boats are, and it just completely changed the war. So it took men of all abilities. You needed the commanders on the ground, the General Pattons and the Bernard Montgomerys, the Chesty Pullers of the war, and you needed the men behind the scenes doing this espionage work, and the women too, like Virginia Hall. All right, so this is U-559. So we just looked at that. Now, another innovation that was useful during the war to fight against German U-boats was the depth charge. So a depth charge looks like a barrel, like a drum, but it's filled with explosives, and it has a special hydrostatic fuse that could be set at different depths. So you could drop these depth charges off of the side of the boat, thinking that you're in the vicinity of a sub, and then they would explode underwater at different depths. And if they were within like 60 feet of the sub when they exploded, they could do significant damage. Most of the time, subs did not sink because of a depth charge. A lot of times, the depth charges would cause enough damage that the sub would have to surface or sink. So, and to avoid sinking, they would surface, and then the surface ships would either finish them off or the sub would surrender. And then they had this thing called the K-gun. So here's a diagram of it here. And so what they would do is it had like a tray, and then you would load a depth charge on top of this tray up against the muzzle of this K-gun, and you would fire this thing, and it would launch the depth charges off the side of the ship. So you could really spread out your depth charges over an area. So if you had a bunch of destroyer and destroyer escorts launching depth charges all over the place, you could do a fairly good job of keeping them away from your valuable ships in your convoy. So here's a demonstration of a guy firing a K-gun. Obviously, the depth charge has already been launched. And then over here, this is a submarine that was recovered that actually had damage from depth charge. You can see like it got all bent and the rivets popped out, and yeah, so. Okay, I think that's where we're going to stop here. Just give you a few closing pointers. In 1942, German U-boats sunk 7 million tons of Allied shipping. By 1943, after the Enigma discovery, or not discovery, but the code books on the U-559, the Allies were able to reduce that by more than half, down to 3 million tons of shipping lost to U-boats. In May of 1943, the Germans lost 34 U-boats in 1 month. So if you look back, we said in the early part of the war, they sunk 397 ships, losing only 7 U-boats in that whole 6-month period, and now they lost 34 in 1 month. And by the end of the war, 785 out of 1,162 German U-boats were sunk, costing the lives of 30,000 German sailors. We don't know for sure, but estimates are that close to 70 to 80% of German sailors died on U-boats. That's a huge mortality rate, higher than any other service branch in any other military in World War II. So the most dangerous job in the war was to be on a German U-boat. So they had great success, but also great risk. Okay, so hopefully you learned a thing or two watching both parts on subwarfare and Nazi Enigma and Nazi wolf packs, etc.